Hi, I'm MC Jessie. 大家好，讀你聽2.0，今日繼續讀 Miguel de Cervantes 嘅 Don Quixote， 讀到第45節啦。呢節嘅名叫做 In which the doubtful question of Mambrino's helmet and the pack saddle is finally settled, with other adventures that occurred in truth and earnest。題目講咗啦，同呢個理髮師嘅糾纏呢要完結啦。咁上一回就係講呢個理髮師啊，原來佢都追到嚟呢個旅館喎。呢個旅館呢霎時間呢真係非常之熱鬧啊！所有人都走到嚟呢個旅館咧，就見到 Sancho， 就認得 Sancho， 就話佢偷佢嘅用具，偷佢嘅 saddle 啦。咁但係 Sancho 咧就否認嘅，佢話咧佢哋攞到嘅咧係戰利品，而唔係佢嘅物品。Don Quixote 咧都話咧呢啲咧係佢戰勝翻嚟嘅，而呢啲嘢咧唔係盤，又或者唔係 saddle， 係一個頭盔，同埋咧唔係一個馬鞍咁簡單，係戰馬飾物嚟嘅。咁所以咧就唔構成咧呢個盜竊，即係咁樣。咁另一方面咧就係呢個 Don Louis 啦，一個後生仔啦，就係追上嚟揾呢個 Clara 邊個咧就係 Judge 啦，裁判官啦個女啦，想提親啦。咁但係裁判官咧呢一刻係唔同意嘅，係唔承認嘅。咁就想呢個小朋友咧就不如再犯規啦。好，我哋繼續睇下呢個旅館發生諸多事情係點樣收拾啦。跟住我哋交俾 Costa 同大家讀嚟聽。
What do you think now, gentlemen, said the barber, of what these gentles say, when they want to make out that this is a helmet? And whoever says the contrary, said Don Quixote, I will let them know he lies if he is a knight, and if he is a squire, that he lies again 1,000 times. Our own barber, who was present at all this, and understood Don Quixote's humour so thoroughly, took it into his head to back up his delusion and carry on a joke for the general amusement. So addressing the other barber, he said, Signor Barber, of whoever you are, you must know that I belong to your profession too, and have had a license to practice for more than 20 years, and I know the implements of the barber craft, every one of them, perfectly well. And I was likewise a soldier for some time in the days of my youth, and I know also what a helmet is, and a morion, and a headpiece with a visor, and other things pertaining to soldiering. I meant to say to soldiers' arms, and I say, saving better opinions and always with submission to sounder judgments, that this piece we have now before us, which this worthy gentleman has in his hands, not only is no barber's basin, but is as far from being one as white as from black, and truth from falsehood. I say, moreover, that this, although it is a helmet, is not a complete helmet. Certainly not, said Don Quixote, for half of it is wanting, that is to say, the beaver. It is quite true, said the curate, who saw the object of his friend the barber, and Cardenio, Don Fernando, and his companions agreed with him, and even the judge. If his thoughts had not been so full of Don Louis's affair, would have helped to carry on the joke. But he was so taken up with the serious matters he had on his mind that he paid little or no attention to these facetious proceedings. God bless me, exclaimed their butts the barber at this. Is it possible that such an honourable company can say that this is not a basin but a helmet? Why, this is a thing that would astonish a whole university, however wise it might be. That will do. If this basin is a helmet, why, then the pack saddle must be a horse's caparison, as this gentleman has said. To me it looks like a pack saddle, said Don Quixote, but I have already said that with that question I do not concern myself. As to whether it be pack saddle or caparison, said the curate, it is only for Signor Don Quixote to say, for in these matters of chivalry all these gentlemen and I bow to his authority. By God, gentlemen, said Don Quixote, so many strange things have happened to me in this castle on the 2 occasions on which I have sojourned in it, that I will not venture to assert anything positively to reply to any question touching anything it contains, for it is my belief that everything that goes on within it goes by enchantment. The first time, an enchanted Moor that there is in it gave me sore trouble, nor did Sancho fare well among certain followers of his, and last night I was kept hanging by this arm for nearly 2 hours, without knowing how or why I came by such a mishap, so that now, for me to come forward to give an opinion in such a puzzling matter would be a risk to a rash decision. As regards the assertion that this is a basin and not a helmet, I have already given an answer. But as to the question whether this is a pack saddle or a caparison, I am not ventured to give a positive opinion, but will give it to your worship's better judgment. Perhaps as you are not duped knights like myself, the enchantments of this place have nothing to do with you, and your faculties are unfettered, and you can see things in this castle as they really and truly are, and not as they appear to me. There can be no question, said Don Fernando on this, but that Signor Don Quixote has spoken very wisely, and that with us rests the decision of this matter, and that we may have surer ground to go on. I will take the votes of the gentlemen in secret, and declare the result clearly and fully. To those who were in on the secret of Don Quixote's humour, all this afforded great amusement, but to those who knew nothing about it, it seemed the greatest nonsense in the world, in particular to the 4 servants of Don Louis, as well as to Don Louis himself, and to 3 other travellers who had by chance come to the inn, and had the appearance of officers of the Holy Brotherhood, as indeed they were. But the one who above all was at his wits' end was the barber whose basin, there before his very eyes, had been turned into Mambrino's helmet, and whose pack saddle he had no doubt whatever was about to become a rich caparison for a horse. All laughed to see Don Fernando going from one to another collecting votes, and whispering to them to give them their private opinion whether the treasure over which there had been so much fighting was a pack saddle or a caparison. But after he had taken the votes of those who knew Don Quixote, he said aloud, "The fact is, my good fellow, that I am tired collecting such a number of opinions, for I find that there is not one of whom I ask what I desire to know, who does not tell me that it is absurd to say that this is the pack saddle of an ass, and not the caparison of a horse, nay, of a thoroughbred horse. So you must submit, for in spite of you and your ass, this is a caparison and no pack saddle, and you have stated and proved your case very badly." "May I never share heaven," said the poor barber, "if your worships are not all mistaken, and may my soul appear before God as that appears to me a pack saddle and not a caparison. But, laws go, I say no more, and indeed I am not drunk, for I am fasting, except it be from sin." The simple talk of the barber did not afford less amusement than the absurdities of Don Quixote, who now observed, "There is no more to be done now than for each to take what belongs to him, and to whom God has given it. May St. Peter add his blessing." But said one of the 4 servants, "Unless, indeed, this is a deliberate joke, I cannot bring myself to believe that men so intelligent as those present are, or seem to be, can venture to declare and assert that this is not a basin, and that not a pack saddle. But as I perceive that they do assert and declare it, I can only come to the conclusion that there is some mystery in this persistence in what is so opposed to the evidence of experience and truth itself. For I swear by," and here he rapped out a round oath, "all the people in the world will not make me believe that this is not a barber's basin, and that a jackass's pack saddle." "It might easily be a she-ass's," observed the curate. "It is all the same," said the servant. "That is not the point, but whether it is or is not a pack saddle, as your worship say." On hearing this, one of the newly arrived officers of the Brotherhood, who had been listening to the dispute and controversy, unable to restrain his anger and impatience, exclaimed, "It is a pack saddle as sure as my father is my father, and whoever had said or will say anything else must be drunk." "You lie like a rascally clown," returned Don Quixote, and lifting his pipe, which he had never let out of his hand, he delivered such a blow at his head that, had not the officer dodged it, it would have stretched him at full length. The pipe was shivered in pieces against the ground, and the rest of the officers, seeing their comrade assaulted, raised a shout, calling for help for the Holy Brotherhood. The landlord, who was of the fraternity, ran at once to fetch his staff of office and his sword, and ranged himself on the side of his comrades. The servants of Don Louis clustered round him, lest he should escape from them in the confusion. The barber, seeing the house turned upside down, once more laid hold of his pack saddle, and Sancho did the same. Don Quixote drew his sword and charged the officers. Don Louis cried out to his servants to leave him alone and go and help Don Quixote. And Cardenio and Don Fernando, who were supporting him, the curate was shouting at the top of his voice, the landlady was screaming, her daughter was wailing, Maritornes was weeping, Dorothea was aghast, Jacinta terror-stricken, and Donna Clara in a faint. The barber cudgeled Sancho, and Sancho pummeled the barber. Don Louis gave one of his servants, who ventured to catch him by the arm to keep him from escaping, a cuff that bathed his teeth in blood. The judge took his part. Don Fernando had got one of the officers down and was belaboring him heartily. The landlord raised his voice again, calling for help for the Holy Brotherhood, so that the whole inn was nothing but cries, shouts, shrieks, confusion, terror, dismay, mishaps, sword cuts, fisticuffs, cudgellings, kicks, and bloodshed. And in the midst of all this chaos, complication, and general entanglement, Don Quixote took it into his head that he had been plunged into the thick of the discord of Agramante's camp, and in a voice that shook the inn like thunder, he cried out, "Hold all! Let's all sheathe their swords. Let all be calm and attend to me as they value their lives." All paused at his mighty voice, and he went on to say, "Did I not tell you, sirs, that this castle was enchanted, and that a legion or so of devils dwelt in it? In proof whereof I call upon you to behold with your own eyes how the discord of Agramante's camp has come hither, and been transferred into the midst of us. See how they fight, there for the sword, here for the horse, on that side for the eagle, on this for the helmet. We are all fighting, and all at cross purposes. Come then you, Signor Judge, and you, Signor Curate, let the one represent King Agramante and the other King Sobrino, and make peace among us. For by God Almighty it is a sorry business that so many persons of quality as we are should slay one another for such trifling cause." The officers, who did not understand Don Quixote's mode of speaking, and found themselves roughly handled by Don Fernando, Cardenio, and their companions, were not to be appeased. The barber was, however, for both his beard and his pack saddle were the worse for the struggle. Sancho, like a good servant, obeyed the slightest word of his master, while the 4 servants of Don Luis kept quiet when they saw how little they gained by not being so. The landlord alone insisted upon it that they must punish the insolence of this madman, who at every turn raised a disturbance in the inn. But at length the uproar was stilled for the present. The pack saddle remained in caparison till the day of judgment, and the basin a helmet, and the inn a castle in Don Quixote's imagination. All having been now pacified and made friends by the persuasion of the judge and the curate, the servants of Don Luis began again to urge him to return with them at once. And while he was discussing the matter with him, the judge took counsel with Don Fernando, Cardenio, and the curate as to what he ought to do in the case, telling them how it stood, and what Don Luis had said to him. It was agreed at length that Don Fernando should tell the servants of Don Luis who he was, and that it was his desire that Don Luis should accompany him to Andalusia, where he would receive from the Marquis his brother the welcome his quality entitled him to, for otherwise it was easy to see from the determination of Don Luis that he would not return to his father at present, though they tore him to pieces. On learning the rank of Don Fernando and the resolution of Don Luis, the 4 then settled it between themselves that 3 of them should return to tell his father how matters stood, and that the other should remain to wait upon Don Luis, and not leaving him until they came back for him, or his father's orders were known. Thus, by the authority of Agramante and the wisdom of King Sobrino, all this complication of disputes was arranged. But the enemy of concord and hater of peace, feeling himself slighted and made a fool of, and seeing how little he had gained after having involved them all in such an elaborate entanglement, resolved to try his hand once more by stirring up fresh quarrels and disturbances. It came about in this wise. The officers were pacified on learning the rank of those with whom they had been engaged, and withdrew from the contest, considering that whatever the result might be, they were likely to get the worst of the battle. But one of them, the one who had been thrashed and kicked by Don Fernando, recollected that among some warrants he carried for the arrest of certain delinquents, he had one against Don Quixote, whom the Holy Brotherhood had ordered to be arrested for setting the galley slaves free, as Sancho had, with very good reason, apprehended. Suspecting how it was, then he wished to satisfy himself as to whether Don Quixote's features corresponded, and taking a parchment out of his bosom, he lit upon what he was in search of, and setting himself to read it deliberately, for he was not a quick reader. As he made out each word, he fixed his eyes on Don Quixote, and went on comparing the description in the warrant with his face, and discovered that beyond all doubt he was the person described in it. As soon as he had satisfied himself, folding up the parchment, he took the warrant in his left hand, and with his right seized Don Quixote by the collar so tightly that he did not allow him to breathe, and shouted aloud, "Help for the Holy Brotherhood, and that you may see I demand it in earnest. Read this warrant which says this highwayman is to be arrested." The curate took the warrant and saw that what the officer said was true, and that it agreed with Don Quixote's appearance, who, on his part, when he found himself roughly handled by this rascally clown, worked up to the highest pitch of wrath, and all his joints cracking with rage, with both hands seized the officer by the throat with all his might, so that had he not been helped by his comrade, he would have yielded up his life ere Don Quixote released his hold. This landlord, who had been forced to support his brother officers, ran at once to aid them. The landlady, when she saw her husband engaged in a fresh quarrel, lifted up her voice afresh, and its note was immediately caught up by Maritornes and her daughter, calling upon heaven and all present for help. And Sancho, seeing what was going on, exclaimed, "By the Lord, it is quite true what my master says about the enchantments of this castle, for it is impossible to live an hour in peace in it." Don Fernando parted the officer and Don Quixote, and to their mutual contentment made them relax the grip by which they held, the one the coat collar, the other the throat of his adversary. For all this, however, the officers did not cease to demand their prisoner to call on them to help, and deliver him overbound into their power, as was required for the service of the king and of the Holy Brotherhood, on whose behalf they again demanded aid and assistance to effect the capture of this robber and footpad of the highways. Don Quixote smiled when he heard these words, and said very calmly, "Come now, babes, ill-born brute, call ye highway robbery to give freedom to those in bondage, to release the captives, to succor the miserable, to raise up the fallen, to relieve the needy. Infamous beings, who by your vile groveling intellects deserve that heaven should not make known to you virtue that lies in knight-errantry, or show you the sin and ignorance in which ye lie when ye refuse to respect the shadow, not to say the presence, of any knight-errant. Come now, band, not of officers, but of thieves, footpads with the license of the Holy Brotherhood. Tell me who was the ignoramus who signed a warrant of arrest against such a knight as I am? Who was he that did not know the knight-errant are independent of all jurisdictions, that their law is their sword, their charter their prowess, and their edicts their will? Who, I say again, was the fool that knows not that there are no letters patent of nobility that confer such privileges or exemptions as a knight-errant acquires the day he is dubbed a knight, devotes himself to the arduous calling of chivalry? What knight-errant ever paid poll tax, duty, queen's pin money, king's dues, toll of barry? What tailor ever took payment of him for making his clothes? What castellan that received him in his castle ever made him pay his shot? What king did not seat him at his table? What damsel was not enamored of him and did not yield herself up wholly to his will and pleasure? And lastly, what knight-errant has there been, is there, or will there ever be in the world, not bold enough to give, single-handed, 400 cudgellings to 400 officers of the Holy Brotherhood if they come in his way?
唔該晒 Costa。好，呢節讀到嚟呢度。喺呢一個階段呢，成個旅館嘅男士們呢喺度大混戰。Don Louis 嘅嘗試逃走啦，就俾裁判官嘅人挾持住啦。咁啊 Sancho 啊 Don Quixote 咧就同個爸爸啊，同啲 Holy Brotherhood 嘅人對打啦。眾人呢就扭打在一起，但女士們呢就喺度尖叫。打到後來呢 Don Quixote 咧終於就叫停所有人啦。佢就同眾人講，佢話：我認為呢個旅館一定係受到呢個魔法沾污咗，令到我哋神志不清，就互相陷罰。我哋都係有識之士，都係人才，點解會做呢咁嘅事呢？點解會互相陷罰呢？唔應該我哋應該停止我哋嘅鬥爭。個 Holy Brotherhood 咧發覺，咦呢個 Don Quixote 同我哋嘅受暴令中提及嘅形容嘅呢個人好相似喎。於是乎佢哋將呢個搜查令就再同 Don Quixote 對照下，發覺佢真係呢個人。而 Don Quixote 所犯嘅罪咧，就係佢之前放走嗰啲囚犯，而呢樣嘢又真係發生咗。於是乎咧，佢哋就唔能夠善罷甘休嘅，提出要拘捕 Don Quixote。咁咧，於是咧再打起上嚟啦。咁但係 Don Quixote 咧呢一刻咧，佢咧就講佢話冇呢乜事，我係一個騎士，騎士係有特權嘅，我係唔需要履行一啲普通平民百姓嘅義務，因為我有個騎士。一個字同大家分享 implement。咁平時 implement 咧，我哋會用動詞嘅方式去理解佢啦。不過喺呢一個文中咧係名詞嚟嘅。implement 嘅名詞嘅意思係咩咧？ A tool, utensil, or other piece of equipment that is used for a particular purpose。即係呢度咧係講一個器具。咁文中有提到啦一個理髮師同另一個理髮師講佢話我都係理髮師我好清楚咧我哋呢個行業咧所需要嘅 instrument 需要嘅工具，我認得出嘅。好，今日嚟到呢一度，我哋下一次再同大家讀你聽，拜拜。
If you like this video, make sure to comment, like, share, and subscribe to Costa. See you next Friday.